Welcome to day 26 of the federal election campaign, and it is once again debate day, which means that the leaders have survived the first debate and are going up against each other, this time in English, tonight. I had a really great time watching the debate with like 500 of you on Twitch last night. That was wild, but I'm going to be doing it again tonight, so hope to see you there. Starts at 7 p.m. Eastern. Before I get into talking about last night's debates and what you can expect today, I need to update you guys on this scoop that I reported earlier in the week of this guy who is a board director at the ROM, Canada's largest museum, and has other ties to Canada, also being the executive chairman of the company whose planes are flying the mass deportations to the El Salvador prison. After my reporting and your reaction to my reporting, there's been a huge development. The ROM confirmed to me yesterday afternoon that Jamross stepped down from their board of governors. The only reason I have the time and the ability to do this kind of reporting is because you guys have supported me. So I just want to say thank you, because we have to keep shining a light on the things that people choose to do in an era of backsliding human rights and eroding democracy. Because while we can't control the disgusting choices people are going to make, we can control whether or not they have to own that publicly. All right, I just wanted to update you guys on that. Now back to the debates. Speaking broadly, nothing really happened at the debates that I think will shift the political calculation that's going on or the polls significantly. There were no major flubs by Carney in French. In fact, I actually think that how many people have been talking about how bad his French is has meant that people are surprised when they hear him speak it and not be like a toddler. So that's kind of working for him. Poilievre did his best to rein in the attack dog, and he largely succeeded. He wasn't like too adversarial and barely said lost liberal decade all night. So yeah, that was probably a good performance for him. He didn't get in his own way in that sense, but he also didn't really land any blows on Carney either. There were a few moments that made me do a double take, like when all four male leaders were talking about women's rights, and also when Jagmeet Singh pressed Carney on the issue of the genocide in Gaza. Here's how that exchange went.
Heartbreaking to see innocent people being killed. Mr. Carney, why don't you call things as they are? This is a genocide. People in Israel do deserve peace and security, but people in Palestine do as well. What is going on right now is a genocide against people in Palestine.
You can conclude.
Why won't you admit it?
The situation in Gaza, in the Middle East, is horrible.
It's a genocide.
But I never use that word in a political way to politicize the situation.
All right.
But it's a matter of facts.
That was Mr. Carney's response.
While that is the issue that saw a lot of votes move away from Kamala Harris in the States, I don't think that Carney's answer was enough to spook people who would normally be supportive of the NDP but are considering voting Liberal this election, and that's what's boosting the Liberals so much in the polls. I don't think it's enough to scare those people back into voting NDP, because I think that they recognize that Pierre Poilievre is even worse on the issue of Palestine and are kind of realistic about their options here. In fact, Poilievre in the debate last night reiterated that he would defund UNRWA, which is like a primary provider of humanitarian aid to Gaza. So if we stopped giving them money, that would just exacerbate the existing humanitarian crises on the ground. Yeah. My friend Chris Curtis also asked a really good question to Poilievre on the issue of Israel's genocide in Gaza, specifically wondering if he'll criticize anything that Israel has done in Gaza to date. In response, Poilievre did not specifically criticize anything that Israel has done, even though Chris specifically pointed out the bombings of universities and hospitals and things like that. But he did say that a country has to try to minimize civilian casualties, so I guess take that for what it's worth. But honestly, that question period was the thing that stood out more than the actual debate itself, in my opinion, because the Leaders Debate Commission totally screwed the pooch on this one. If you watched yesterday's video, you already know this, so I'll try to summarize it quickly for the folks who didn't see that one. But basically, Rebel News threatened to sue the Leaders Debate Commission because Rebel was trying to send 16 reporters to the post-debate scrums. And for the record, they only let each actual news outlet send one reporter to each scrum. In the end, because they kicked up such a fuss, Rebel News was able to send 5 of its personalities to the press conferences when other outlets were only able to send 1 person. So they had 5 times the number of people there. And I say personalities because a court ruled that Rebel News is not a Canadian journalism organization. So yeah. And in turn, those personalities, as well as some other right-wing media outlets, dominated the question period. There was also some sketchy stuff, like True North recently seems to have rebranded as Juno News, but they registered one journalist under Juno News and another journalist under True North, so they got 2 separate questions and 2 different reporters at the scrums out of that. So yeah. In the end, according to Andrew Coyne, who did the math, Rebel and True North got as many questions as CBC, Global, Radio-Canada, and La Presse Canadienne combined. And these right-wing personalities used the opportunity that they had on this national stage to engage in a lot of just bullshit diatribes. Rebel predictably asked multiple times about itself, and also there was residential school denial and gross transphobic questions from some of these right-wing journalists. And in a moment that genuinely disgusted me, sorry for the jump scare, Mark Carney had to take questions from this bridge troll who was one of the people who co-wrote the article attacking Carney's non-binary child over potential healthcare treatment that they received as a minor. Not only that, but the question before that Carney had to take was from the person who co-founded the outlet that published that piece. It's genuinely offensive to me that the Leaders Debate Commission allowed that to happen. And for the record, Carney's response kind of sucked too. When asked how many genders there are, Carney correctly distinguished between gender and sex, but then he said that there are only 2 sexes when intersex people do exist. In fact, there are apparently as many intersex people as there are redheads. So he really needs to do better in response to those questions, because we saw notable online transphobes celebrate his response. But once again, at the end of the day, the fact that these dudes were able to crawl out of their mother's basements and have this national platform at all rests squarely on the Leaders Debates Commission. And this ties into a much bigger issue, which is that because of their fear of being labeled as not neutral or as biased, these bodies that are responsible for deciding who is a journalist and adjudicating access to politicians and press conferences, because they're too afraid of being perceived as biased, they end up becoming increasingly complicit in the pollution of our information ecosystem. They have to meet the moment and grow a spine. This is on them. Anyways, I can't wait to see how this goes tonight. And the irony of this decision making was not lost on the Greens, who were not allowed to participate in the debates while these cosplayers were given plenty of airtime. Now, I'm not saying that the Greens should have necessarily been allowed in, because I do think they failed to meet the criteria, depending on your interpretation of it, but I also think the Leaders Debates Commission should have decided that before the day of. They should have decided that when they knew that the Greens didn't meet that criteria like over a week ago. So just a lot of really bad decision making from the Leaders Debate Commission, and I'd be surprised if they're still around for the next election, but we'll see. The Greens are certainly calling for them to be gone. Anyways, tonight I'm certainly going to be watching to see if this kind of a clown show happens again, but I'm also going to be watching for, again, how the NDP and the Bloc do, because the Bloc actually really stood out in the English debates last time, and again, their supporters are what is boosting the Liberals up and kind of making this into a 2-party race, because their supporters have left them and are coalescing under the Liberals. So those are 2 people to watch. I am also curious, after he played it kind of safe and timid last night, if Poilievre is going to let his attack dog out a little bit more tonight. There is also one last non-debate headline I want to mention that's from the last 24 hours. You guys know how the girls have been fighting, and Doug Ford came out in defense of his campaign staffer, who said that the way that the federal Conservatives are blowing the massive lead they had in the polls a while back is tantamount to campaign malpractice. And then Ford said, sometimes the truth hurts. Well, that infighting has reached a point where people are now wondering if Ford is actually trying to vie for Pierre Poilievre's job. And he was asked about that yesterday, and he said, no, he doesn't want that. We'll see. Anyways, that is the news from the campaign trail today. You can find me on Twitch live tonight at 7 p.m. I hope to see you there. If not, I will see you tomorrow with your next election update. Until then, what do you think of all this?